Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to the RDS, and thank you for coming. This evening looks at an important subject: how to get the next generation to love science. This event is part of the RDS Science and Technology programme. Science education has been core to the RDS since we were founded almost 300 years ago. Today, the RDS is building on this legacy by developing and delivering Ireland's premier school science education programme, ESB Science Blast. This is an innovative, curiosity-led programme that, like the RDS itself, spans the island of Ireland. This long-term investment in the next generation will help thousands of children to enjoy science and become scientifically literate adults. And before we join our guest speakers, I would like to take a moment to outline the RDS ambition in this field. Here in the RDS, we believe that STEM education, most of all at primary level, is critical to Ireland's future. Each of us here can probably look at our interests now as adults or areas in which we have excelled and trace it back to our childhood. So we should not be too shocked to know that researchers have also proven a powerful link between STEM and early childhood, and that in learning STEM skills early on, children are better prepared for the future. As today's 8 to 12-year-olds mature, they will be asked to make important decisions of themselves and for their loved ones. How do we slow down climate change? Should I vaccinate my children? Is organic food better? STEM has benefits beyond learning science, technology, engineering, and maths. It assists in the problem-solving and exploratory learning that fuels success across a variety of tasks and disciplines. And while not every child will have a career in STEM, it is imperative that they have the essential skills to make sound decisions. STEM education builds scientific literacy, and this has to start at primary level, I believe. STEM learning is key in the classroom because of its relevance to students' lives and because it develops universally applicable problem-solving and critical thinking skills. These are lifelong skills that allow students to generate ideas, weigh decisions intelligently, and understand the evidence behind decision-making. Teaching technological literacy, teamwork, and creativity through STEM education gives students the skills and knowledge they need to succeed in school and beyond. However, we face some challenges in this area. We know that children usually form a basic opinion about whether they like the sciences shortly after beginning school. If this is a negative opinion, it can be hard to engage those students in science as they grow older. To really engage with young students, learning opportunities must be exciting and engaging as well as educational. We also know that we need to do more to engage primary teachers in STEM learning so that they can help students see themselves as scientists and engineers instead of just reading about it in a textbook. Teachers need more support and innovative ways to help students engage with this subject matter. Keen to play our part in shaping a better future, the RDS created ESB Science Blast to create opportunities for both students and teachers across the island of Ireland. ESB Science Blast is an experience like no other. It is designed to generate a passion for STEM among students and teachers, with the key long-term outcome being the development of key skills that will support them to thrive in the 21st century. This evening, we can take you into the classrooms and share with you the excitement and the buzz that students experience this year. You will hear from students, teachers, and their judges, and get insight into the questions and the thinking that ESB Science Blast generates. So I'll ask my colleague to play the video, please.
ESB Science Blast 2022, myself, Cara Murray, and my co-host John Sharpson took to the road visiting 14 brilliant primary schools all across Ireland. Inside the classroom, we got a detailed look at the hard work, creativity and collaboration that went into the different ESB Science Blast investigations. We were blown away by the children's enthusiasm for STEM, their excitement to share what they learned, and how quickly they had learned to think scientifically. Tonight, we want to share some of the amazing questions students asked as part of their ESB Science Blast investigation. So, enjoy an insider look into some of the questions and their results.
Well, we've just touched down here at Gorey Central School.
What was the very first step you had to take when you started your investigation?
Learning about the teeth.
Whereabouts is the cereal now, do you think? In your stomach?
Everyone got a sheet and they had to put all the right organs in the right spot.
Is that right?
No.
He's wrong.
Deliver!
Oh!
I asked them a question the other day who would be interested in being a scientist in the future, and a lot of them put their hands up, some of them are hesitant. I think that's very honest. But we asked them then who is more interested in science after doing the Science Blast, and I think everybody had their hands up then, didn't you?
Science Blast!
Our project's about the effects of gaming on our well-being.
Video games have an effect on our well-being. I wouldn't think, oh, that's a science question.
Video games is a normal topic to talk about. So if you dig deep enough, like every question has a science root.
Exactly! If someone said to you, what Science Blast, what would you say?
I'd probably say that it's mainly experiments, finding out stuff you didn't know already, and just enjoying yourself.
I'm here outside Church Street National School in Rathkeale, County Limerick, and I'm about to find out, do plants affect soil erosion?
We had to get tin trays. We had to plant radishes in one of them and then leave plain soil in the other.
We used the same amount of soil and same size like tins and you have to wash them regularly, so like the same amount of water.
To actually test the experiment, we put them up on them wooden blocks and we cut the back of them and we poured water to see how much soil came out.
And we can see here lots of soil came out of the ones that had no plants in them.
It was wonderful to have the opportunity to once again take part in the Science Blast. I suppose it's given real life opportunities rather than sitting in front of a board and a screen and a teacher.
I think the girls really enjoyed it and they learned a lot, which is the main thing. And as you were saying, girls in STEM and everything, it's very important to kind of inspire a little bit of interest in science at this age, and they all did an amazing job with their projects.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. It was really, really good. The children really enjoyed it, and they were teaching us more than we were teaching them.
The best way to learn is that hands-on investigation in every subject and integration. I think that's the best way to teach, because the children can learn about the world around them, and it covers the curriculum for us as well.
But you only have to come to a school as a judge and look in the kids' eyes and see the lights in their eyes.
You will see from the kids, you'll see the value they get from it.
Here are even more amazing questions from schools all across Ireland.
Bye!
Bye!
I think you'll all agree that's something special, isn't it? Lovely to see that. The RDS has long been committed to STEM education in schools as a vital long-term investment in Ireland's future. And the next 10 years are no different. We want to examine how we can do more to nurture early talent in the sciences. We want to consider what we can do to create a shift in how we deliver and value early STEM education. And we want to better understand the STEM pathways into second, third level and beyond, and consider how we can support this journey. To realise these ambitions, we will require input from a range of people: science educators, researchers, policymakers, industry and the wider STEM community. And we look forward to further collaboration with many of you in the room here tonight. As I said at the beginning, this sort of project is at the very heart of what we do here in the RDS. It is big, it's ambitious, and it tries to make a real difference at scale. It is not possible for the RDS to do this alone, and strong partnerships are at the very heart of our success. It would not be possible to develop and deliver ESB Science Blast without our title sponsor, ESB. I would also like to record our heartfelt thanks to our other key funders, particularly the Department of Education, Science Foundation Ireland, the Irish American Partnership, Jones's Engineering, Pulsar, Irish Aid, Forest na Gaeilge, Bristol Myers Squibb, and other partners and individual donors. I extend our gratitude to them for their continued commitment to ESB Science Blast. And for those of you not on this journey with us, but who share our ambition, I invite you to join us. Later, we will be joined by Dr. Mairead Hurley and Meadbh Costello in conversation with Dr. Niamh Shaw. But before that, I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Alastair Blair, who's the country manager for Accenture Ireland. Alastair, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Geraldine. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, a very good evening. I think ESB Science Blast is a most amazing concept. But when you see that, you realize it's a proper reality. And it brings to life, I would have loved to have been in a classroom like that, let's face it. And I'll come back to that later, because I probably wasn't in the classroom mentally, at least, as much as I should have been. But bear with me, because the second but last in-person event I was at in 2020 was ESB Science Blast. And I think I remember it vividly, because it was the second last event. I remember what a privilege it was to be there, but I also I'm delighted to be here this evening, because I think what happens next is what really matters. But to be part of that conversation is quite important. It's quite important not because of me, but because our business employs a heck of a lot of STEM graduates and an awful lot of people around Ireland, some nearly 6,000 people now. I still have the event brochure, actually, and I dug it out of it's still in my bag, which is over there, believe it or not, 2 years later. And it had two sentences in it that really stuck in my mind. They almost flew off the page at me, for they are, I think, as true today as they were 2 years ago. And indeed, after the last 2 years we've suffered, I think they have heightened importance. So if you don't mind, I'll go back a bit before I go forward. And the then CEO of the RDS, Michael Duffy, said, I think, that the ESB Science Blast aims to ensure that a generation of children can realize their full potential to think critically, to work collaboratively, and to value creativity and to have the confidence to communicate their ideas with a strong voice. Like, that just sticks in my mind as the sort of graduate we'd like to employ, or the sort of person we'd like to employ. And then Pat O'Doherty, the then CEO of ESB, said it was to help to ignite children's innate curiosity about the world around them, and through the process of science discovery, and help equip them with the skills and the approaches that they're going to need in the future in order to thrive. To me, if we'd had all of that 2 years ago, we might be thriving as opposed to feeling we might have survived. But I would argue that the last 2 and a bit years, if all it's done is simply amplify the urgency for such skills. And when you think of how we've had to adapt to a world changing more rapidly than ever before, I think it puts it in sharp light. Now, before I dive into the fray, I will be very honest, because I think it's the best policy. My own experience of self-development perhaps has been the access to lifelong learning was a greater gift to me. It probably saved me from what many of my teachers said was not a very good student, lacked attention, and couldn't quite get there, but ho-hum. So I'm not standing in front of you as one of those business people who has a hugely impressive academic track record. I don't. Secondly, I don't have a master's or a PhD, but I have a bit of a journey in life. Now, but I think I was good enough at my studies. I didn't work that hard. Didn't have what I think Pat talked to, which is that spark to ignite what was a curious mind. I was perhaps more nosy about education than I was properly investigative in my early years, and I ended up doing engineering of all things because I sort of liked the STEM subjects. They weren't called that then, they were called something else, hard subjects or something. I thought I could apply my mind to them best, and I could get enough results just about to get into college to do that, which is a thought process I'll return to because I still think it exists. I also, of course, because I'm an 80s kid, well, I'm actually a 70s kid, but I'm an 80s grad, there were jobs for ages, but not enough, of course, jobs for anyone in those days. So that said, the importance of education was never far from the kitchen table at what we called tea in those days, is now dinner, of course. My grandfather was a headmaster, so it was drummed into me, constantly reminded of the importance of education, even though I probably either didn't listen or didn't want to hear it. But I, like so many people, generations around me and my generation, have been lucky enough to grow up in a country that has benefited from some very big decisions that were taken around education, specifically the provision, of course, of free education. And I go back that far because I think we're still living with the dividend of that. A core policy for a nation that says education is important has brought us, I think, to a point where we can look back with misty eyes, but actually, my main point is that education is a gift. A breath of education is a gift, actually. It's such a fundamental gift, and we never need to lose sight of that, even if sometimes, like me, we don't want it. It sometimes arrives at your door when you don't need it. But I think it also needs to change as the world needs to change, and the world, in my view, and in the view of our business, at least for what that's worth, is rapidly changing at a speed we've never seen before. And with that point in mind, and perhaps looking more to the future, we also need to pause and reflect on what we've lived through. So I will be a little grim for a moment, but I am an eternal optimist of a form. But that fateful day on the 13th of March 2020, the start of the pandemic, I think we drew a line. Everyone can talk to their own experience of the pandemic. I'll probably draw on that in terms of the impact on education and younger folk, but the impact on communities and organizations have been horrific in some cases. One massive change, though, perhaps to the positive, is you think about what got us through, you think about what technology has enabled us to do, the huge shifts in our daily lives, both personal and working, how, for example, a working life and a home life are melded into one. I mean, my wife and children never thought they'd see me because for 35 or at least 33 years, I probably spent 20 days at home. In the last 830 or so days, I've spent almost every day and maybe 20 days in the office. That is a profound change at one level. We learned what I would call not thrive behaviors, but survive behaviors, routines to help us through. We learned them in a matter of days. So we're an incredibly adaptable entity, the human being, but I think Ireland is an incredibly adaptable nation. And we've lent on technology, like it or lump it, more than ever before. But then you think, what about our young people? I'm kind of the proud owner of 3, 21, 20, and 16. Their experience of the last couple of years has been less than good. And while they might have undoubtedly shown resilience and come together wearing what I call the green jersey, because I'm a big sports fan, to deal with the pandemic, we're all too aware of the challenges they're now grappling with, and I'll come to that in the context of education. But this generation of young people have been hit hard. A global pandemic, there is continuing economic fallout, and there's worsening climate predictions, and now a war waged on our continent. This seems like the worst of all worlds for them. And I say that, as I say, being slightly grim. I will become more positive. In our and in many others' experience, though, the transition from education in recent years to the labour market has become much more difficult. And there's a strong risk that the pandemic has only exacerbated that, set it back further. There's an increase in the research we've done, there's an increase in inequalities as young people face the double whammy of both disrupted education and that more pessimistic economic outlook. We launched a digital divide report recently, the second version thereof, and it shows that the long-standing issues around the haves and the have-nots in an emerging digital society have become more nuanced and become much more focused on age and the socio-economic background, particularly when it comes to the dreaded digital skills. Still to many people a mystery, but the digital and more advanced skills, we see a huge gap emerging between socio-economic groups. We say the better off having higher access to skills and engagement, the less well off, much less so. One of the biggest gaps, though, between the groups was in the use of the internet to find a job. You would think most people find that normal. 54% of the higher social class scored themselves 7 out of 10 on that. Only 38% was the same in the lower socio-economic groups. So that's perhaps the more pessimistic view of the challenges, as I say, stacked up against us. Before I look at what we might do to future-proof ourselves and look at the impact of STEM and all the skills that need to be brought together, let me add two further comments that might be a very big statement to the very obvious, but I believe they're vital. Our business is founded on technology. It is everywhere. It's not just on our phone, it's in our pockets, it's in our offices, everywhere. It's in our homes, it's in our fridges, I found out the other day, much to our cost. And it's going to be in our bodies, whether we like it or not, helping us perhaps stay more healthy or possibly helping us to live longer. So we've reached a point where technology is all pervasive, and it seemed to be true pre-pandemic, but the situation is merely accelerated. And I keep using that. I would argue that I am obsolete in about 3 months from now, unless I keep up with what's happening in our business and with our clients. And I don't say that as some form of mid-50s person provoking the rest of the world, so to speak. So whilst technology is seen as the solution to very many of the problems we face, it is not in and of itself the answer. And we learned that in spades over the last 2 years, I believe. So much of what we now do and what we will do next, I believe, hinges on bringing those brilliant STEM skills and marrying them with the 4 C's of the 21st century skills. I've heard them called soft skills, life skills, but actually they are the skills of communication, critical thinking, creativity, and real collaboration. And they are all part of the characteristics of, I think, vital skills for this country and for every nation. Scientific literacy and understanding, which can contribute to the societal ability to deal with the sorts of challenges we've spoken about. National and global challenges and opportunities, climate change, any future pandemics, the ethical development of AI, which is something our clients are talking about us constantly, and indeed everything in between. Now, brilliant technology, I believe, and aspects of those 4 C's have helped us through the last 2 years, and with the chance to thrive into the future as an economy. But we have much to do. And the pandemic, as always, I think, has highlighted, unfortunately, or indeed amplified our strengths and our weaknesses in every aspect of life, and our preparedness indeed, and where we need to focus. And it's also provided the impetus to make real change happen. Not what I call the survive change, but the thrive change. There was obviously one relatively bright or extremely bright person in Accenture. It wasn't me 2 years ago, because we changed our strapline to be, let there be change. That person had a sort of savant-like insight to the future. So let me talk a little bit about future-proofing, because I've talked a little bit about the grim and the opportunity, and maybe begin to develop that. I will upset people. I'm perfectly certain I have upset people with these sorts of comments in the past, but I believe in them, and we as a business believe in them, and as industries believe in them. We need profound change in our education system based on our experience, real lived experience of hiring hundreds of graduates, postgraduates, and experienced people. We're very emboldened by some of our politicians in government talking about radical transformation. I dragged that cut and paste throughout, from primary to secondary, and through to tertiary, and indeed what I benefited from lifelong because of my own weaknesses in primary and secondary. I also think we have, if not a blank canvas, near as, and the need to redesign design much of how we teach and how we learn in what is now a fully digital age. My kids don't think analog, they think digital, and I am the grumpy old man in the corner who can't understand. We also need to think about how do we prepare young people today for a tomorrow that's not yet being designed. I was prepared for a world that was at least moving at a speed I could catch up with. But what role will education play in that world where you provide the tools but not the finished product? And the timing is opportunity, because our economy and the industries that operate here are steeped and now dependent upon technology, whether food, agriculture, life sciences, pharmaceutical, medical devices, technology. All businesses, I would now argue, are digital businesses, like it or lump it. But think of the opportunities. And we're also now on the cusp of the next great tech-driven economic revolution, notwithstanding the challenges we face in front of us with pandemic and so many other things. So there is the potential to create profound positive change across, I told you I would become optimistic, but profound change across all aspects of our society, not just business and employment. So STEM skills will become ever more vital to the world, but there is more to that, and great opportunities for those STEM skills. We've operated here for about 50 years, just over, and among the many lessons we've learned in this time is that problems can't be solved by people who understand their own discipline. I say that because I joined as a computer programmer. I was left on my own to develop a system that somebody then fixed or tested and then told me what it should look like, as opposed to what I thought, as a rather grim engineer, what I thought it should look like. So as we look now to empower the next generation using that blank canvas, I think we must create workplace environments and the skills built around multidisciplinary teams, where the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. How do we get there? Make no bones about it, this is not me criticising the education. We have an unbelievably fine education system that has helped Ireland become an incredibly attractive place to live, work, grow up, and learn, and given access to that gift I've spoken about. And when I travel the world, which I still have the chance to do post-pandemic, you never hear anything other than good about the Irish. And I mean, people not just born here, people have come here, the work ethic, the ability to adapt to different cultures, different countries, working environments. For now, we've unbelievable synergies between universities and clusters, whether that's in life sciences or engineering or technology. That has benefited everyone, but there are challenges earlier in the education system, in particular the second level, in our view, where the focus is more on aptitude than perhaps attitude and breadth. And frankly, which is usually the point at which I upset people, in a points-weighted leaving certificate cycle, we reward people that have the ability to, or the aptitude to knuckle down and do what's required to learn and risk more on one paper on one day than you'd ever really want. And that won't be fit for purpose when you move into your working life. It tends to encourage young people to focus only on what they're good at or very good at in order to maximize the points. And I've heard this because I am a parent. The points yield, very odd term. And it is only at that stage they may get access and exposure to the wider 4 C's I talk about in terms of a job search. Only after school they learn those critical skills, life, C's or whatever. With the pressure being most exclusively on the points race, students inevitably focus on those top strengths, not their wider skill set nor their weaknesses. And we very profoundly believe they miss the chance to broaden their horizon and it comes back later. I'd also argue that young people have an incredible attitude, an openness for learning and appreciation of other disciplines and an adaptability like I have never seen before, certainly not my generation. And they're much better equipped to take on board those new skills that will serve them well in future jobs and in their life more widely. But we need to help them learn to learn and then also learn to think earlier and think more broadly. Some of that, honestly, and I've talked to some of the university presidents and chancellors, etc., we're making strides at third level in terms of broadening skills and cultivating that work readiness. And that's far more prevalent. But we still have a tendency to push people towards a 3 or a 4-year degree in one dimension or one domain or otherwise. And we should have the opportunity here to invest more in their breadth of skills earlier. So back to the concept of the 4 C's and drawing them in earlier in the career, we need, I think, to support students to develop the depth of a content area, but that must be as part of an amalgam, if you don't mind the term, of skills that creates the basis for their future, and bring it earlier. I keep saying bring it earlier. This means people will have flexibility in their lives to study, to train, or increasingly to retrain as both their circumstances or their job or the economy changes, as it inevitably will at that greater speed. So the reality is, I think we have to unwire some of the hardwiring in our education. Not all of it, but there is no replacement for depth in a discipline. But we need to look at how we now meet the needs of future skills and future proofing of students in secondary and beyond. We also need to act fast, because it could take the best part perhaps of a decade for those first graduates of any enhanced education to employment pathway to make a difference in the workplace. I can't say this more strongly. There is a massive opportunity, but of course veiled within it a threat for Ireland, because lots of countries want a piece of what we have, a unique set of aspects at this moment. I think the beautiful thing about this country, other than the scenery, is we're big enough to be relevant and we have such incredible insight, and we're also small enough to be nimble if we choose to be. We talk about punching above our weight. We've certainly done that in terms of growing and sustaining our economy, but now we have to ensure we're nimble, smart, and we have a talent pool in place that is available for those new and emerging jobs, but also to help fuel the wider of society in Ireland. How could we do this? We should aim to have, I think, aim to achieve this in two ways. Firstly, a program that allows us to invest in the talent pipeline earlier, delivering impact actually like ESB Science Blast does at the formative stage of a child's educational pathway, massively positively influences their later academic choices. There's just no two ways about it. Later at second level and in third level, you can frame and shape it, but at the earliest possible intervention is fantastic. Coming out of the pandemic also, I think we want to develop scientifically literate global citizens. There is nothing, even for a relatively poor engineer, there's nothing more enraging than seeing people deny science and facts. There's just nothing more enraging. We need to base things on science and then infer from that what we can do. This isn't about career outcomes. Science can and should be for everyone, and we need to get that message out loud and clear and build encouragement around that. It is important that our education system also creates the basis for that scientifically literate society. And in doing so, we build a makeup in our students. We can build business skills and we can build technology skills, but there is another important dimension that I am utterly devoid of and was devoid of, which is the creative skills that are now so critical as that we talk about STEAM, we talk about user experience, we talk about design experience. But Ireland has been brilliant at this for centuries, have we not? We were or are a land of saints and scholars. People talk a land of creativity. I think we're a land of innovation and ideas. We are bursting with ideas. It's about how we help develop and grow those. And this can be applied to other pathways to work. Yes, we have one of the highest third level participation rates in Europe, but we need to balance that with the real needs of people, communities, and the jobs of the future. So commend everything that's been done around apprenticeships and the enormous potential of apprenticeships in equipping more young people for rewarding work in every sector, whether it's technology, financial services, hospitality, and beyond. The contribution of those people is quite extraordinary, though, because they both have the ability to do dual learning. They learn by doing, but they also earn while they learn, which can be incredibly attractive to people. It also might help reduce the innate pressure and the dropout rate in higher education when people realize I'm in the wrong spot. But they have lifelong learning at its heart. That's vital. Let me move on quickly because I don't want to bore you to death. This won't take a village. I love the term, it'll take a village. This will take a nation. And it'll take the communities within it. It'll take the RDS, it'll take ESB, it'll take Accenture, it'll take academia, it'll take the government. It will take the entire civil service, I believe, to help engender what we need to do. And it'll be built on partnerships, whether that's with employers, universities, further education colleges, who will have to work hand in glove and can. And I'll say it one last time, the partnerships like the one we see here with ESB Science Blast, that's what we need more of. We absolutely need to engender the excitement and the buzz in the classroom. We are doing exactly what Mark said, I think, 2 years ago, thinking critically and working collaboratively. And it's these types of partnerships that will enable our third level institutions, colleges, and second level to respond to employers' skills needs and reshape what the students can offer. And it is a virtuous circle. There are people who object to me saying that because people think it's all about getting jobs in those dreaded multinationals or something. But actually, this is about much, much more than that. This is equipping people. So while we can't second guess the outcomes, we already have indicators to what skills will be needed in the future. Multiple projections already paint a brilliant future for Ireland for occupations in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and creativity. And as the population increases and perhaps natural resources diminish, disease prevention and treatment become more intricate, and the mysteries of the universe keep on being investigated, science and innovation will remain critical to expanding the human understanding for solving the challenges of today and preparing for what's yet to come. So STEM isn't just, I say, a collection of subjects, it's very much a critical part of the economy and the communities across all of our Ireland. We're not producing enough, and I might just skip through a couple of points, but part of the problem lies in the STEM pipeline. We've carried out 10 years of research into this. We find, unfortunately, 41% of adults claim they do not understand the meaning of the term STEM. That's odd. 71% claim that students were not given enough information early enough in school about their potential future careers and how STEM links to that. So we all need to solve this. It creates a momentous task, but one we can challenge and I think address in how we solve this in schools and universities. We also need to foster curiosity. It's also important to address the challenges of attraction and retention of students in STEM-related domains, and it's incumbent upon business and everyone to address this. I think the key point here is we need to make sure we get to people early. We also need gender diversity. We need to get to women and girls earlier in their careers. There remains a significant disparity, and that can't be good for people, can't be good for anyone, can't be good for the answers and the solutions we come up with. So unless we can address those, both the mismatch and the increasing demand and falling supply and the gender imbalance, we will face a significant shortfall. But think about the opportunities. That's where I keep my head. I think you'll all agree that everyone in this room will agree we have an obligation to allow people, the young people, the opportunity post-pandemic to explore, to have the opportunities certainly I feel I've had in my career. And part of that is ensuring they have both the inspiration and the opportunity to engage with STEM subjects early, but also that broader set of skills. And whilst all of this is happening in front of our eyes, technology is transforming industries and businesses at an incredible speed. Technology became a critical factor in the pandemic, and we're absolutely invested in it. We don't know the skills we may need, but we know the tools that are required in the toolbox. And equipping and encouraging people to engage in lifelong learning is part and parcel now. Continuous reskilling, I think, is the essence of what I've had to learn, and it's getting harder for me, to be quite honest. So giving the people the skills and the desire to continue to learn is imperative. Final couple of comments on, we published a digital divide report, as I said, in April. And there is a lack of appetite that we also need to create in perhaps more in my generation. More than a third of people of my age group said they don't see a need to improve their digital skills. I find that really hard to take. While around a quarter said there would be nothing that would motivate them to get better. So we need to change that mindset. Now, I'm not here to preach, and you'll say, but you've just done that for 25 or 6 minutes. But I think there's a momentous opportunity for education in this country if we pull together. It is a revolution in the way that people can potentially gain skills throughout their lives in this digital world. And it is the key to unlocking our potential as a country and as a society around the world, engaging as we do with everyone. And if we get it right, people of all ages, even me, can go as far as they want in terms of their talent and ambition, whatever unforeseen events occur. And they will be able to make the most of the opportunities as they arise. And they will be able to do it from wherever they live, which is the other profound change. So we're not just creating a future for our children. I think we're actually helping to future-proof the country and give people the opportunities they need. Building our skills base will not only support our nation's economic recovery, but it'll also position us at the leading edge. The danger of being at the leading edge is you need to stay there, but there's a great opportunity. I want to finish a very quick look back. Somebody mentioned it earlier. Of course, we're gathered in the RDS, which was founded by the Dublin Society, who concentrated on technology as it related to tillage and other agricultural areas at the time. And it's still true today. Agriculture is at the very heart of everything we do. We are a huge innovative nation in the concept of food and beyond. So it's humbling to remember that Ireland's decision to become a more open economy is considered one of the most important developments in modern Irish economic history. And that has been heavily influenced by farmers and the agricultural industry in the 50s. We must take a leaf from that book. We need to foresee the opportunities that are ahead, and we need to see what's out there on the horizon. I always say to our teams, we are a unique, small, yet unbelievably wonderful country. We need to make change happen. It's a time for really fresh ideas. They are there. It's also a time to work together and collaborate, all of us, to invest in our collective future. Reimagine the role of ambition in the world, and the role that STEM can play cannot ever be understated. It is enormous. So it's bold strides required, and embrace the change, and try to innovate almost as if we had to during the pandemic, when we were living by the seat of our pants or the skin of our teeth. So let me say it's been a real honor to address you. I honestly hope I haven't been too provocative and I haven't bored you to death. I believe 2020s can be a decade when we see past what we're dealing with now to be almost a decade of renewal and recovery, because we need that to be a sustainable country, sustainable nation, and to create a sustainable society. Thank you very much indeed.
So I'm Niamh Shaw, and I'm delighted to host this sort of debrief and further discuss some of the comments that came up in Alastair's discussion and other things around STEM education in general. So to my extreme left, which is your right, we're joined by Meadbh Costello, and let me just read out some of the amazing things that Maeve has already done with her life. So Maeve is a policy executive responsible for skills, education and innovation policy at IBEC, which of course is the Irish employer and business representative body. And in this role, she's responsible for providing support and strategic advice to IBEC member organisations on topics related to talent attraction and development, as well as lobbying and the formation of policy positions on issues related to the education and training system and the innovation ecosystem. And prior to joining IBEC, Maeve has extensive experience as a policy analyst and project manager in the business, think tank and public sector in Ireland and abroad. Thanks very much, Maeve, for joining us tonight. It's great. And then beside me, to my left and your middle, is Dr. Mairead Hurley, and she's a researcher with Science and Society Research Group in Trinity College Dublin School of Education. Her research interests lie at the intersection of science communication, education and public engagement, with a particular interest in learning environments and experiences that connect the STEM disciplines within the arts. And she's held previous roles as programme manager with the STEM Teacher Internship Programme at DCU, as well as head of research and learning in Science Gallery Dublin, where she led the €3 million European Commission-funded System 2020, which maps science learning outside the classroom in 22 countries across Europe and the Middle East. So they're my two panellists. Aren't I lucky to have these on stage with me? So that was really interesting, wasn't it? That was like, I was like, yes, 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 as I was hearing it. What were the key takeaways for you from what you just heard Alastair respond?
Yeah, thanks, Niamh. I mean, I agree with you. I could see 3 nodding heads in a row and where we were sitting. But I think the real thing that stood out for me was the talk about time and speed. The time that we're in right now, this really pivotal time. And looking back at the last 2 years, so there were so many mentions of that we need to make changes and they need to be fast. We don't have any time to lose. Yeah. And we know that changes can happen fast. We saw how incredibly quickly entire education systems turned everything on their heads but still managed to work and do things. And we know that, you know, education opened up to being not just about the teachers but about the families, about the environments people were in when they were forced to, you know, learn in a different space, not in the classroom. So, you know, really excited to think about how these changes that we need to make fast could happen. And the other thing, I suppose, that stood out to me that will make that happen are the partnerships and the different people, the different stakeholders and actors that we can work together to make these changes happen. But it does, you know, take a village, take a nation, take all of the different talents and drawing on multiple disciplines for new kinds of learning. So, yeah.
And that's your area, of course, as well. You know, looking at all these cross disciplines and stuff. We'll come back to that maybe in a while. Maeve, what were your key takeaways from what Alastair kind of covered, and just how to future-proof Ireland?
Yeah. To be honest, I was completely enthralled with that whole speech, because it so reflects what broader industry are saying about the education system, about the future of work, skills, but also society today as well. Yeah. So I think, I hope everyone took really great notes for that, because it was so interesting. But the piece I particularly like is just how Alastair spoke about this whole continuum of education. It starts in your early years, your primary, secondary, tertiary apprenticeships, but also lifelong learning. And I think we need to speak and start speaking a bit more regularly, not just about in silos, about this one particular piece of the education system and is this working and how can we get it to work better. It's the whole lifespan. It's that lifelong learning piece and it's the life-wide learning piece as well. So I think that's something that if we were to, as policy practitioners as well, walk away from this event today with, it's that speak about the continuum of education and put the learner at the centre of that and how they are impacted by what's going on in the education system around them. But I think also, and just one point around that, we know Ireland isn't producing enough STEM graduates to keep up with the types of jobs that we are seeing in the labour market today. But getting people involved in STEM, it doesn't start in tertiary, it doesn't start in secondary, it's as early years education, really. It's sort of the toddlers of the world. We almost need to be, we need to be getting in on this as well. And we also know, if I throw another statistic out there, if we look at computer science graduates in particular, 1 in 5 computer science graduates are women. So if we want to tackle things like gender stereotyping and people's whole notions around, well, what is education and what is STEM, that needs to happen a lot earlier than what we're doing now. So again, going back to these early interventions and looking at that whole continuum of education is going to be really, really critical.
Yeah. There's so much, I agree with everything you're saying. I think the thing that I got really excited about was the 4 C's, you know, this idea of communication, critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. I mean, if I was taught that in school, oh my gosh, like, because like you, Alastair, I was a bit of a slow burner as well, and like I've kind of really found my passion in the last sort of 10 or 12 years. And, you know, I was a really good student and I did my exams and everything, but I was hopelessly lost because I don't really think I knew how to think critically about the things that I really had to say, you know. So it would be amazing if we could have a society where from a really young age we could empower people to have those skills. I think we could have, you know, there'd be no stopping us. Like it would be terrific, you know. And lifelong learning. My dad's 83. You know, he's still learning. He taught me beekeeping just 2 years ago. You know, this notion that, you know, you stop learning the second you finish your degree or when you finish in secondary school. And it's sad, I think, that people think that, because I'm a very curious person. I'm sure you guys are as well. And like, I just love information, and it came from the home that I lived in. And some of the work that I do now is I'm working with parents of children in secondary school, and I'm trying to help them fall in love with what they're most curious about, because it is about creating this support structure where it's not just the children that are being educated. Everybody, you know, should have this lifelong learning approach, you know. So where do you, what kind of experiences did you have in the house? So I guess I had a house where, you know, we were allowed, you know, read as much as we wanted, and you know, I think that's what kind of made me the person I am. But what about you, Mairead? What kind of house did you grow up in?
Yeah, like that, full of information, being encouraged to question things, reading. And I think for me, I was interested in every subject. I was never a science person or a... Actually, no, I think I inherited the opposite problem of I'm not an arts person because I can't draw.
Yeah.
Even though I played music from 4 years old, but I never realised that that's the arts as well. So that was the bias. But I suppose we were, always brought to things like not science centres in Ireland as such, because we didn't have them as much, but definitely when we would be away travelling, it would be going to a science centre or a museum. And like you mentioned about learning in different environments, the research I've been doing has been really about the STEM learning that happens in out-of-school spaces, like in science centres or zoos or aquaria, and how sometimes those places are where the interest is sparked. And that actually really did happen for me. We were talking about your love of space and astronomy, and for both of us growing up, we said we didn't do astronomy or science in our curriculum until... Actually, we didn't do it really at all.
I didn't do it at all.
Physics.
I did geography. One class. There was 8 planets. That's it. Moved on. Next.
But I went to a museum. I think it was in Belfast. It wasn't particularly a science museum, but it had a science section, and there was a bit about astronomy. And I was just taken. I was like, this is what I want to do. And I had already picked my Leaving Cert subjects. I'd picked chemistry and biology as my science. And I came back saying, I need to do physics because I need to study astronomy. And they were like, no, you've missed 3 weeks. You can't. And I actually fought until I got allowed to do physics, and then ended up in a degree in physics and a degree in astronomy. But that was from that moment in that out-of-school space that really sparked that for me.
And it was so random.
So random.
It had a whole influence on the future direction of your career.
Yeah.
It's so true. What about you then, Meadbh? What are your early influences?
Well, I actually don't come from a STEM background at all, so it's probably a bit unusual to have someone like me speaking at a STEM event about how great STEM is, but it is great, and I'm very happy to say that. But I was probably similar to Alastair. My mother was a teacher as well, so she very much valued the academic engagement and sort of doing well in your exams and doing well in your school and attendance and all that. But I also engaged engaged in, well, it wasn't the ESB Science Blast, but something very similar about bringing young people in and trying to empower them in the communities and look at what's happening around them and, you know, what is the student voice on that? What's that young person voice? Because, you know, in 10, 20 years, they're going to be the community leaders, they're going to be the politicians, they're going to be the business people. And I think that actually had a really formative experience for me, because I sort of went on to become very curious about, maybe it wasn't completely STEM related, but it wasn't very far off. But we were discussing topics like, well, you know, what's the forestry like in Europe? And, you know, how can we sort of improve that? And what are the policy changes that we need to do there? And what are the fish stocks like in the Mediterranean? And very sort of niche questions to be asking a 15 and 16-year-old. But, you know, again, I think when you ask them, you would be surprised that they actually might have an answer. So I think sometimes it's about, well, are people posing them the questions? And are you encouraging young people to actually look at the world around them? And are you actually giving them that voice and opportunity to engage? So those type of projects, I think I'm sort of proof in the pudding, really, that it goes on to actually influence people in their later careers and their later lives, and it really does sort of stick with them.
Yeah, I mean, your whole career is based on that, essentially, isn't it?
Essentially, yes.
yeah, you know what I mean? But, like, it's so true when you ask questions of like, I was doing something for Science Week last year, and I was working with a group of teens, and they were making a video about mental health, and they had these amazing insights of, like, they really understood the intricacies and the delicacies and how each other should take care of each other. And they said nobody ever asks our opinion. We'd have loads of ideas if people asked our opinion. So we should definitely do it more.
I think on that point as well, we talk about the 4 C's, and we mentioned critical thinking, but it's not just critical thinking, you know, evaluating a piece of evidence, but actually being critical of the systems that they're inheriting. Like Alastair mentioned, they're inheriting all of these crises that we've created, and then we're saying, innovate your way out of that. Go on, off you go, be creative. And we have to, you know,
help them with.
We have to help them. We have to support them, and we have to look out for their well-being. We have to promote empathy and understanding and realization that, the human skills as well as the technical things we need. We need all of these things.
So you're doing a lot in that, right? So where are things at now then, Mairead, you know, in order for us to be able to future-proof, you know, for this future? I mean, you're doing some incredible research. Can you give us a kind of a slice of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the approaches that I think is really promising, the European Commission have been funding open schooling as a concept over the past few years, and the idea that schools work with their wider communities and with business and industry and everything, and locally as well. So addressing global challenges, but in their own communities and areas. And Trinity, previously Science Gallery, then the School of Education took it on, have had a project called Open Science Hub, which is coming to an end. It's been in 9 countries around Europe, and they've done great work. They've really tackled challenges like that, made that youth voice important, made the socio-scientific issues relevant. It's not just about, a lot of the projects in Ireland actually looked at issues around water. I think it was a coincidence that all the schools did that, but they were coastal schools and one in Ringsend. But so they were doing things like looking at water quality and plastics, but they were also looking at things like about consumption and behavior and human issues. So that approach, looking at how schools can collaborate with other experts and with other community actors, I think that's so promising. And I think the need for maybe a little bit more flexibility in how we can adopt innovative ideas like that is really needed, because the challenge for us was always like, how do we implement this? Oh, do it with the TYs. Do it with the TYs. The schools are running out of space for their TYs to do all the projects that all of the, you know, different people can do. So we do need to think about, and there is space in the primary curriculum, and that's why ESB Science Blast is amazing, that they have this lovely freedom and time, and they work together to investigate challenges. So I would agree again with Alastair that at secondary level, creating space in curricula and pulling away from that race to the finish line and actually making space. So that's kind of
I agree. What about you, May, from your viewpoint? Where are things at now, from your point of view?
Yeah, I think there's pockets of excellence really throughout Ireland, and it's about how do we mainstream either from the informal education which is happening now and move it into what we're focusing on and really embed those type of things in our education system. So I think Alastair already mentioned this whole idea of the 4 C's. We like to talk around, and I'm going to throw another term at you for this, the T-shaped graduate. So again, these are the graduates and the young people who are coming out of academia with these broad foundational skills that are going to be relevant for whatever path they take in life, whether it's a different career, but also they're the active citizenship skills as well. So they're not just important for industry, they're important for being an active member of society and being a consumer in a knowledge-intensive society as well. But we also do need to develop that very sort of vertical, intensive knowledge in specific skills areas. So I think that's what's going to make people more resilient to the future of work, is that sort of blend and amalgamation of those 2 areas. And I think when we talk to industry as well, that's where we really need to see skills development being focused on, is the develop of those employability skills around critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication skills, etc. I think in terms of that whole continuum of education as well, we know Ireland performs well, and internationally we do get feedback that says we perform well, and the education system is a really important part of our competitiveness offering. But when we look at lifelong learning, we perform well compared to the EU average, but we're nowhere near competitors like Denmark and others. So I think there's a real need to actually focus on how can we actually up the amount of time people are engaging in lifelong learning pursuits, and how do we sort of, I always say the most valuable thing an education system can create is someone with a curious mind.
Yeah.
That's the most important gift an education system can give, because you're setting them up for a career of lifelong learning.
Yeah.
But we also need to make sure the structures are there. Things like flexible access to studies, including short courses, micro-credentials, part-time remote online learning, but also a really well-funded and robust career guidance service as well, because people need the information and knowledge about where to go. So I think we perform well in a number of areas, but we now need to sort of look at our competitors around us in Europe and elsewhere and sort of think, how can we really boost what's happening?
Yeah. I think what you're both kind of leaning towards is this notion that we're putting a lot of pressure on the schools. And I think what you're saying is culturally, we need to start bringing in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths into our everyday lives. It's sort of something I think we're all really passionate about. You know, I certainly have it as my byline that you want to contribute to creating a culture of STEM engaged people. It was really interesting about the digital divide. You know, like somebody put up a tweet the other day. It was really sad, where you had kind of there was a sort of like a sort of a workshop where you had somebody in their 20s teaching these older people how to use a mobile phone, you know, and I guess that kind of is where we're at, you know, even with my own parents as well, the gap between, you know, trying to stay up to speed of what is kind of just taken as basic now, you know, even just banking systems, everything is so online that we need to create a society that everybody's comfortable with science, technology, engineering, and maths, and also to have a say in the future direction of the decisions that we make as a society. You know, I could go on about that forever about space, but science as well. So what do you think of that, Maeve?
Yeah, I was just going to say on that point, we know in Ireland only 53% of the population have basic or above basic digital skills. So that is a massive digital divide in terms of the people with the skills, not only to get into employment, because we know 9 in 10 jobs into the future are going to need some level of digital skills, but also just to sort of see your online doctor, make your online food orderings,
which the bank, all
go to the bank,
online,
etc. So I think there's a real need to sort of underline the importance of digital skills for everyone, not just for a select group of people. But I think there's also a notion out there sometimes that young people are digital natives, so we don't need to teach them about digital, and that because they can do TikTok and because they can do, you know, social media, that they understand digital literacy. And I think we need to just challenge that a bit in our primary and second levels in particular, and sort of say, well, what actually is digital literacy, and how can we sort of build true digital natives? Because it's broader than social media. That's an important part, but it is broader than that.
Yeah, digital natives. What does that mean? I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, another term to throw out.
That's great. It's like, ooh, it's lovely. What about you, Mairead?
Yeah,
Like,
I absolutely agree with that point. I think, and it comes back to as well, like Alastair mentioned about ethics, and I think, you know, and data literacy. How is data being collected and used, and what are who's controlling it? All of those things. So as well as young people learning how to use the tools, that they understand, you know, what the tools are being used for and the context. And like, digital natives, my son is 4, he's already started coding. So I'm like, I have a digital native at home. But yeah, it's terrifying. But so it's a good way to find out how they work. And he's finding that, like, it's a toy for him, the same as other toys. So
it's amazing. And they're so intuitive. You know, you put an iPad or an iPhone in front of a child and they'll immediately. And then
knows how to do
I've seen them look at go on an ordinary computer screen and they just kind of go to the television and they're like, they don't understand why it's not working. You know? That's kind of the future society.
My laptop is full of
it's like, oh, it doesn't work. You know.
But on that as well, like, I suppose the other thing to think about is, like, we talked about the arts, and the arts again are more and more involving digital art, and digital art is a huge
NFTs.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about promoting creativity, we have to remember that as well. And I think that, you know, melding the disciplines between STEM and the arts and technology being a big part of that as well is really important.
It is, because I think, you know, I'm sure you hear this time and time again, is like a lot of people say, oh, I was never good at maths in school, or I was never good at science in school. And it's like it just sort of shuts off. And, you know, having been in rehearsal spaces with artists and stuff, they'll just, you know, they'll just like write off their whole, their whole scientific and logical brain, when it really just boils down to, you just have to find the right way to access this information. And unfortunately for them, somewhere along the way, that kind of broke down, and it happens for a lot of people. Are you finding that in your research, like the multidisciplinary approach? Are you finding that the artists have this, you know, there's this kind of stereotype saying that's coming in all the time, and scientists saying, oh, I'm not creative, or like, what's happening when you're putting those two things together?
Yeah. It's a great question, because I think it's different for everybody. And obviously some people, it's new to them, and then others it's not. But the more often we can create spaces for people to share different perspectives earlier on in education, the easier and easier it gets for it to happen then in professional spaces. I think it's about finding common language. And I think story is really a great way for finding that. Like, I'm working on a collaboration with a physicist and with some artists, and her research is about measuring air pollution, and it's used for climate modelling. But they were really struggling to understand, well, it's a data set. What does that mean? It's a data set. And she was, you know, explaining, well, we use these instruments, and that was all fine. And it was only the moment that it became a story of how the data was used, and it was turned into a climate model, and it was predicting a storyline. And this storyline tells us where our climate could go if we don't make a change. And that suddenly created like something completely different, that then they were like, and then the idea for the artwork started to emerge. And so, creating space for sharing and language and all of that, and those things take time. So I think those collaborations need to be encouraged but supported over longer time frames. You know, sometimes funding cycles are, do a project in 6 months. And you need 6 months to learn how to speak to each other when you've spent 30 years in a different, speaking different languages, you know.
It's so true. The words we use can be so elitist and exclusive, and, you know, everybody has their shorthands, everybody's got their acronyms. But I guess when you're trying to collaborate, you have to find that common ground and that common language. So that's a perfect example of it. And the project's going well, is it?
It is, yeah.
Oh, that's terrific.
It's working out in Galway, and we're working with some community groups, which I know is something you're very interested in as well. And it's really important.
Yeah, very much so. And so what can we do, in your opinion, Maeve, given with your background, how can we future-proof Ireland to prepare for, you know, this technology is everywhere and it's going to be part of our everyday lives? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a whole host of number of things that we can do, and I think it's not to be overly critical about where we are now, but it's more about picking up where are we doing things well and how can we do them better, or else, even more importantly, where are we doing things well and how can we mainstream them? Because what I think when we look at sort of the likes of the different industry engagements that we have going on now, ESB Science Blast is wonderful because it provides that space for challenge-based, problem-based learning, which we know is so critical for developing those employability transversal skills. So how can we sort of take the lessons learned from that and put it into our mainstream education? Because that's the direction we need to move if that's where we want, if they're the skills that we value and we know are going to be important in the education system. But we also know when it comes to sort of industry engagement in the education system, industry are engaged in so many different projects around STEM. ESB Science Blast is one of them, but we have things like the Digital Futures Programme, which is operated through CWIT, the STEM Teachers Internship Programme, which you might want to say something about, the Digital Wealth Programme operated from Microsoft and Maynooth, which is looking at sort of digital poverty and upskilling and a whole host of things. So we have pockets of excellence throughout Ireland, and I think sometimes industry is criticised by people saying, well, you're only doing this project with this school because so-and-so's aunt works in your company and that's the only reason you're doing it.
Yeah.
But if you actually flip it on its head and you say, well, actually, so-and-so can only engage in that school because that's where her niece goes, and they actually find it maybe a little bit difficult to engage in schools outside of the community or at a national level. So I think at a national level, there's scope for the department in particular and for other stakeholders to come together and provide some type of national contact point or provide some type of framework that industry can sort of mainstream all of the wonderful projects that they're doing at the moment and perhaps don't get seen in some parts of the country.
Yeah.
So that would really advance a lot of what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, there's a lot in that. I always think, I have this notion of having a town scientist in every town, you know, like they become the funnel where all the activities happen and they become this advisor, like the elder kind of thing, you know, this notion that, because you'll trust somebody that's familiar, you know, and if we kind of use somebody like that in every town, I think that science will become just a normal thing like gardening or baking or, you know, DIY. You know, if we had like the town scientist and imagine like people wouldn't go to Woody's anymore, they'd go to him for all their advice. So do you know what I mean though? Like it is that thing of like a familiar face and somebody you trust has to be like somebody that we can get our information from. And anyway, one day I'll do it. I'll get the town scientist going.
I think that idea, though, is really important because, like, we look at something as huge as climate change. It's massive, it's terrifying, and polar bears are far away. We need local context and relevance. And I loved the girl in the video at the start who talked about, well, it's just a normal thing that we talk about. It was games and mental health. And she said, if you think hard enough, you can find the science in anything. And I was like, that is what it's all about, connecting with interests and leveraging people that, you know, people and contexts and places that they know that are familiar. And I think that will do huge work in reaching equity goals. And that then also ties into the digital divide because there are programs that are much more available to certain people. And there are others that people don't engage with because they don't think it's for them. And we really need to shift, you know, that and meet people where they are. So
yeah, we were talking about this like during the week when we met to kind of have a chat. But like, I really agree with you. So just talking about the ESB Science Blast, it was really nice doing the online one this year, and then you know we all did it, didn't we? We all adjudicated for different. Yeah. It's so cute. It's just it's so rewarding to be an adjudicator.
It's heartwarming.
It is just like it's just the best because they genuinely understand what they're doing, don't they? They genuinely understand the question that they're trying to answer, and I think that's the thing because I loved science in school and I loved maths, but honestly, a lot of it went over my head, and you're just going, just pass the exam, you know. And it's kind of like what you were saying, Alastair, about the point system, because we're so pressured to get the 90% or whatever. Sometimes the time it takes to learn is kind of lost, and now I'm kind of filling in the blanks about the parts of maths and the parts of science that I missed out on. And I guess like learning happens at different speeds for different people. But what you were saying about the community, it is that thing about like listening to the needs of the people at that particular time and what is the piece of information that's missing for them to pursue their career in curiosity? Is there much research on informal learning and all that kind of stuff, Mairead, that can help us understand how to future-proof Ireland if we thought more about these schemes and thought about maybe rolling them out in a bigger scheme?
That was a question that you didn't warn me about in
I'm
advance,
so
I don't have
I'm so sorry. It's
references
just,
on the top of my head.
You're such an expert on
No,
informal
but I
learning.
I suppose I was mentioning equity, and there's amazing research coming out of UCL, Professor Louise Archer's group, and working with learning scientists in the US, and really showing that informal spaces can engage learning out of school, either in programs or just informally every day, can inspire people and people's science identities or STEM identities or STEM capital. These are kind of terms in the scholarship, but they're not fixed. You know, it's not set in stone, and so those spaces are hugely valuable. And I think like that, strengthening the links between them, finding good pathways so that the practitioners in informal know how to collaborate with formal, so that teachers know that the students that are going to the coding club are doing that, and that's how they learn, and that's what works for them, or whatever the connection is. There's a really lovely example in the Netherlands that some collaborators I had were mentioning, that they had a shortage of science teachers in Amsterdam, and so they collaborated with this makerspace, and that every Friday afternoon or something, that the makerspace was fully responsible for the 1 or 2 schools or whatever, their curriculum. It wasn't just an add-on, like go here for a day and see if you like it. It was like, that was part of teaching science, and they were making use of the expertise in that informal space to support a need. And I think that, like, looking for how can we collaborate and address gaps and do better together.
And it worked really well, that scheme, did it? Oh, that's terrific, yeah. I think it is that thing, isn't it? And I think the common thing you brought about, the common language is a big part, making it relevant, you know, finding an example of, you know, science that matches what they're interested in. So for instance, if they're interested in football, you know, bring science to the sports science to them, instead of kind of talking about, you know, what is the law? What is Newton's second law? You know, like, I think you've got to find the right way in, you know?
Yeah.
And
I was going to say, I think it's sort of, you're doing science without realizing you're
like
actually
that little girl
doing
said.
science. So it's that problem-based learning again. And I think that whole piece around the common language really ties into that, because the types of challenges we're seeing in society today that are facing both business as well as communities at large are things like climate change, etc. And I think if we learned anything from COVID, we don't just need scientists who are going to invent the solutions and the measures and sort of tell us exactly what we need to do to keep everybody safe and healthy. We also need the behavioral economists, we need the communication managers who are going to actually make it all work for society at large. So it's that interdisciplinary learning, and where those two worlds can collide is where we're really going to have a lot of success around things like climate change, where we might need to be making some uncomfortable decisions about our futures, or we might need to be making some really brave decisions about our futures as well. So I think that's something that we really need to focus on in our education system too.
Yeah, and you're a big advocate, Mairead, of the holistic approach, aren't you, about approaching this and taking risks? That was what I remember you saying.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
I was really inspired by a European project called Fedora. There was a professor from the University of Bologna talking about it at a conference I attended recently, and she mentioned future shock, and I think it's what Alastair was talking about, that we can't even see the horizon in the future.
No, we don't know.
We don't know what it's going to look like. And there's been so much change so fast, and that young people are just kind of freezing in some cases. And so we need to, I suppose, promote kind of, as well as the curricula that we need to teach, we need to kind of prepare them to embrace complexity and ambiguity and generate hope in some way, but like that as well, risk-taking a little bit as well, because there are going to be unexpected futures. They're going to have to take risks. So she used a lovely term. It was sense-making skills was one part, which is very common, and we understand that. And she talked about strange-making skills, and I loved that. I thought, you know...
Strange-making skills.
So providing learning environments that make sense of what we know, but also prepare us for the things we don't know.
Yeah, and we can't start that early enough. Sure we can't. You know, that empowerment that, you know, you have the right to have an opinion, you have the right to have your say and to not know, and to ask questions. You know, sometimes it's that essentially, isn't it? And being given the permission to say, like, I don't understand, instead of feeling like that you're on your own. Yeah.
Yeah. And for teachers, I suppose, heading into the Science Blast, it might be a bit uncomfortable for, say, a primary teacher who isn't specialised in science. And I love that approach, that they can learn with their students, that they can, you know, they investigate together, they're all learners. And I think that's, you know, it's a really great thing about the programme.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Sorry, Meadh.
We have a few minutes for questions if anybody's got any questions, or I can continue to ask these amazing women more. Does anybody have a question for any of our panellists? Or yes, yourself.
If there's one thing you could change about the Leaving Cert, what would you do?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. If there's one thing you could change about the Leaving Cert, Mairead and Meadbh, and then I'll jump on because I've got the easiest solution. I'll just, what would you change about the Leaving Cert? It's a great question.
I think Alastair probably said it already, but the challenge with the Leaving Cert is that it captures a specific moment in time over a 2, if not 6, if not a 12-year learning cycle. So it really sort of, I think it really defers to testing your ability to recall and your ability to memorize a lot of information and your ability to write it well. But it doesn't test things like, how do you work in a team? How do you communicate with someone verbally, for example? Do you have sort of more intensive critical skills thinking? So for us, I think what we would really like to see the future Leaving Cert look like is more opportunities for students to show their full range of skills that they have at their disposal. Because right now, I think we're only testing a small fraction of that. So things like maybe projects, things like maybe workbooks, you know, lots of different things that I think would give students a better opportunity to show their full potential.
Yeah. What about you, Mairead?
I 100% agree. I couldn't have said it more eloquently. And I think with that, to also accredit the learning that happens outside of school. You know, and to make that part of these portfolios of learning, and to to recognise those different types of learning as well. So I know we need systems, and it's easy to be critical from up here, you know, but I think, we have to try things.
Yeah. What would I change about the Leaving Cert? So much, no. I would encourage vulnerability and authenticity in some way in the Leaving Cert, like to allow the student be empowered enough to say, you know, I don't understand. I can ream off, you know, Pauli's exclusion principle, or I can ream off, you know, all the first 20 elements in the periodic table, but genuinely I don't understand how it applies to my life. You know, I think those kind of, like an exam, like that kind of is like a discussion, or like maybe like your parliament thing, where they realize that their opinions are actually the most important thing about the whole process. And just that pressure about the points, if there was a better way to get people into college rather than that one moment in time, because not everybody is good at exams and not everybody can retain information in the same way. So how do we measure people's aptitude? And I guess it's from creating this culture of informed and engaged people who feel confident to talk about the arts as much as geography, as much as science or whatever. That's what we're ultimately aiming for. Back to the times when we had these salons when people just exchanged ideas, I guess. That would be great. So I'd also change the fact that you have to write a lot during the Leaving Cert, because I got a lot of cramps. I don't know if you did. Yeah. And I had this welt on my finger, which is finally gone, but it took about 20 years for it to go after all that. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Maybe just looking at primary for a minute and the primary curriculum review and redevelopment. Yeah. So if you look at our current science curriculum, you have living things, energy and forces, environmental awareness and care, materials and change, and you have the skills of designing and making and the skills of working scientifically. If there was anything new that you think now maybe is a time to look at coming into the science curriculum, what would you think maybe could come in, or is there anything you think can come out of the science curriculum, thinking that it's actually 22 years old, it'll be 23 years old this September?
Wow. Right. Would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'm not super familiar with it, but that sounds to me that there's a need for something around artificial intelligence and digital technologies and ethics, and maybe that's in a different part of the primary curriculum, but that seems to me where there's a big need as well. And how those apply to the other areas, I think, as well.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think digital doesn't need to just be in its own box in the education curriculum where you're going to do computer science or you're going to do a short course at the junior cert level around STEM. But what we really need to look at is digitally enabled education and how can we have digital technologies in the classroom in a meaningful way, not just technology for the sake of technology. So I think that could be technology while you're doing history and geography and things like that as well. So I don't think it needs to be limited to one small subsection of the education system. We need to look at it a bit more broadly and holistically, and I think that's where we also develop digital literacy.
Yeah. And I suppose with the STEM acronym as well, we use it a lot, but you know, there's often questions: do we really integrate all of it? Do we always do some science and some technology and some engineering and some mathematics? So maybe it's in the teacher, pre-service teacher education, and I know there is great stuff being done, but more opportunities to try out. How do you put in the engineering design process? How do you put technology in as well? Where's the mathematics?
Yeah.
So I think ongoing kind of opportunities to learn how to really do those.
Yeah.
Because it's new. It's still new in the.
Still new. Yeah. I think that's a terrific question. I think what I would say is I've been fortunate to work with some primary teachers, and I work with the ARC as well, a bit like what some of the stuff that like Mairead does, and I'm always trying to find activities that tick drama, literacy, numeracy and science, because there's only so many hours in the day, right? And also I found that a lot of primary teachers, because that's not necessarily the subjects that they studied in their degree, they're very worried about it. So this is where ESB Science Blast, I think, is fantastic, because it shows them that it can be that simple. And sometimes when I'm talking to them, I'm asking them, well, what are you interested in? What do you like doing? And then help them to figure out how to use what they're interested in to match the forces and gravity, the living things, the materials and all that kind of stuff. And again, it's just connecting things, and it's almost like giving people permission to go, I don't understand, and you go, what don't you understand? And you're trying to then help them see and then give them confidence to blossom and to be curious and to explore and to read and to study and to investigate and get them going, because everybody, I think, has the capacity to be curious. It's just sometimes when people mention STEM, it's like it just goes into a box and it's like, oh, I was never good at that. And that's the thing we have to change, It's like this, ignite, exactly what you said at the start, igniting this innate curiosity is what the function of the ESB Science Blast is. I'm just watching time. I think we better finish with that, but they were two great questions, and thank you so much, Meadbh and Mairead. And to close the session, I'm going to ask ESB CEO Paddy Hayes to the stage shortly, because ESB are the proud title sponsor of the ESB Science Blast, which is why we're all here tonight. And ESB is committed to supporting STEM education and learning as a way of helping young people to develop key skills for the 20th century. So to bring tonight's event to a close, can we please welcome to the stage Paddy Hayes, CEO of ESB.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks first of all to Geraldine for hosting and for the fabulous framework and concept that the RDS have built here, which we've been delighted to be part of. I'd like to thank Alastair for his challenging and inspiring words. Really interesting talk, Alastair, so thank you very much for that. Niamh and Mairead and Meadbh, thank you for your insights and perspectives. And I've actually given up. I was taking notes for all the key points, and it just got to the stage where I just had to give up because there was just so much going on, at which stage I thought, well, maybe the best thing rather than to speak would be to show the video that we saw with the kids from Science Blast again. Maybe there's something we can do at the end. But I just thought maybe just the panel discussion I thought was just really fabulous, and we might just give Mairead and Meadbh and Niamh a round of applause just for that, because it was Thank you, guys. And so I'll try and keep it reasonably brief, but empowering the next generation to thrive really is what the central mission of ESB Science Blast, and our shared ambition with the RDS is to help to equip young people with the skills and the approaches that they'll need to succeed in the future. And this is really important. You know, we want to just support them, not just with the critical skills that they'll need, but also to support them to become active and engaged citizens and capable of making informed choices, the choices that they're going to need to make and learn the skills that they're going to need to tackle climate change and the other global challenges, and I suppose to support them in solving those challenges. So for ESB in February of this year, we launched our most recent strategy. We call it Driven to Make a Difference. It challenges us, and we're challenging ourselves to achieve net zero by 2040. But we know that the successful delivery of our strategy, which we think is really important, it really depends on people, and it depends on the people who work in ESB at the moment, but also the people who are going to work in ESB and who are going to work with our partners and our in our supply chain and the other companies that we work with, and in our customers, doing sometimes jobs that don't yet exist. So we know that there's a real challenge out there, and that delivering on our what we consider to be a really vital strategy, and net zero by 2040, is only possible with people, and people who are technically literate and capable of acting around technology. I recently had the pleasure of in person visiting one of the Science Blast projects, the ESB Science Blast projects, visited the 5th class in the Educate Together school in Canal Way in Dublin 8 to hear about their project. Talk about energizing. I know you guys are involved in judging. This was really energizing. They'd work together collaboratively as a class, and I think that's one of the really nice things about ESB Science Blast, is that you get this team effect and this diverse infusion of ideas and creativity working together. They were asking themselves a particular question that they decided to ask themselves, which is, what's the best way to lift a litre of water through 1 metre? So this is really, really interesting, and you should have seen the various and diverse ways in which they came up with the idea of lifting it, and the innovation and creativity and the challenge and the collaboration that went into it, I think was absolutely fabulous. I learned a lot. I mean, they posted their findings back to me. They used Canva presentations. They used poetry. They used photographs. They used activities. They got me involved in doing this. I learned about the power of that diversity and the collaboration and the way in which solutions emerge when you've got really that diversity and that sense of open, inquiring minds all working together. I also learned that the teachers in our primary schools are absolutely fantastic and well worth every penny that they get paid, and the holidays, because their capability of bringing out the best in the young people was just incredible. I thought it was really interesting as somebody who works in ESB, because these guys, they'd chosen to lift 1 kilogram of water through 1 metre, and we have a wonderful and what was at the time really innovative piece of technology down in the Wicklow Mountains called Turlough Hill, and it's almost 50 years old now, where a bunch of equally creative and challenging scientists and engineers years ago decided that it'd be really great opportunity and a great requirement to be able to store electricity in the form of water. And in Turlough Hill, it was relevant back then, 50 years ago, but it's even more relevant today as we're looking at tackling climate change, because what Turlough Hill allows us to do is to take clean, low carbon electricity at the times when the wind is blowing and the carbon intensity is very low, push a lot of water, not just 1 litre through 1 metre, but about 2 million tonnes of water, which is about 2 billion litres of water every day, up about 300 metres up to a reservoir at the top of the Wicklow Gap, and then use it to create electricity from that clean electricity, create electricity when the wind isn't blowing or when we've got a system peak time and when otherwise we would be bringing on gas-fired or coal-fired electricity generation. So it's really fabulous for me to see this concept, which is so central to the future for us and resolving and tackling climate action, and see the children in Canal Way Educate Together grappling with the same sort of challenges and coming up with a whole host of different ways of resolving that. So we've arranged for them to get an opportunity to visit Turlough after the summer, which would be absolutely fantastic. But we know that the skills that those guys have developed through their participation in ESB Science Blast, those key skills that they've got of creativity and collaboration and critical thinking will really help them to survive and thrive, not just in school, we hope, but also in the workplace when they join the workforce. I know that some of those guys will be joining the workforce in about 2033, but we have a big apprentice program as well, so we're hopeful that some of those kids who are involved in Science Blast this year might be maybe in 2028 or 2029 joining our apprentice program or other people's apprentice programs or Accenture's teams looking at developing and exploiting their digital skills for a purpose. So our Driven to Make a Difference strategy, it directly addresses 3 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We call out 3 in particular that we feel are relevant to ESB. It's clean and affordable electricity, it's about resilient infrastructure, and it's about taking urgent action to combat climate change. And I think there's immense potential within Science Blast, not only to look at technology, but also to link it to the strategic development or the sustainable development goals, and to try and find a way of engaging children at that primary school stage in working out how they themselves can play their part in the future in addressing those sustainable development goals, which I think is really clear. I'd like to thank, if I could, the RDS and everybody, I think particularly Maura and Kira here, and the whole RDS extended ESB Science Blast team who've worked so hard this year to make ESB Science Blast a reality, despite the challenges that Alastair was setting out about how we've all worked through the pandemic. Really like to thank that team for making it a reality for so many schools around Ireland. It's been really wonderful to keep it going, and Geraldine, thanks for your support in that. We know that not every child who participates will become a scientist or an engineer, and it's probably really important that they don't. We know that scientific literacy is important, and it struck me when we were talking about diversity, and I was at something recently where somebody was saying diversity and equality particularly isn't about the best, wherever they're from, rising to the top, but this is actually about everybody, and it's about making sure that everybody has an opportunity to engage with science and technology. And I think that way we'll hopefully empower the next generation and hopefully inspire them to collectively respond to the global challenges and the sustainable development goals like climate change. So thank you very much.